towers on 9/11. One of the subsidiaries of Primark, the Analytical Sciences Corporation, TASC, worked with so-called black or top-secret programs. TASC also worked closely with the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Kasputis was also a member of the Logistics Management Institute, LMI, whose members included Paul Kaminsky of In-Q-Tel and General Dynamics, Charles D. Bona of Halliburton, Skull and Bones member Joseph Samuel Nye, and Michael Daniels of Scientific Applications International Corporation. LMI's self-proclaimed role is advancing the science of government. Kasputis' connections to the DOE from 1977 through at least 1997 are interesting, considering that the DOE was developing thermite ignition devices as early as 1983. Joseph Kasputis went on to become the CEO of Baseline Financial Services, which was directly in the impact zone on the 78th floor of the South Tower. According to NIST, Kasputis' Baseline Financial modified the southeast corner of Floor 78 in 1999, exactly where the aircraft hit on 9/11. Floors 77 and 78 were upgraded for fireproofing in June and April of 1998, respectively. Another company of interest on Floor 91, just above the impact zone for the South Tower, was Washington Group International. This company was known primarily as a construction and mining firm, and it had just acquired Raytheon Engineers in July of 2000. In 1996, Washington took over Morrison Knudsen, an engineering and construction firm that had a history of working on large-scale projects around the world, including in China, Iran, Afghanistan, and Saudi Arabia. The Army Corps of Engineers hired Morrison Knudsen to demolish over 200 buildings in 1995. One of the DOE facilities for which Washington was responsible well before 9/11 was the Savannah River site near Aiken, South Carolina. In February of 1997, Lawrence Livermore National Labs and the Savannah River site signed an agreement of cooperation to share technology. Savannah went on to add developing sol gel technology for fuels and other applications to its portfolio. Sol gel technology is utilized by Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories for making nanothermites. In another coincidence, Savannah River Technology staff participated in the search and rescue operations at Ground Zero by providing unique tools. Just before 9/11, Washington was going through a tough time financially and sought Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Securities and Exchange Commission documents show that Washington made court-ordered pre-petition payments as part of these proceedings to a number of companies, including Komatsu. Washington also made payments to Greenhorn and Omara, whose employee, Teresa McAllister, was a lead author of the FEMA and NIST reports on the World Trade Center disaster, and to Sumitomo Bank, which was closely allied with Komatsu. Building 7 was a 47-story federal office building in the World Trade Center site, which collapsed at 5:20 p.m. on the afternoon of 9/11. This building was home to the CIA, in fact the largest CIA headquarters outside of Langley, Virginia. It also housed offices for the Secret Service and the Securities and Exchange Commission. One of the most interesting tenants, however, was then Mayor Giuliani's Office of Emergency Management and its Emergency Command Center on the 23rd floor. This floor received $15 million worth of renovations, including independent and secure air and water supplies, and bullet and bomb-resistant windows designed to withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds. Mayor Giuliani was a former U.S. prosecutor for the South District of New York from 1983 to 1989, who was in charge of investigating the terrorist financing Bank of Credit and Commerce International. After he left his job as a prosecutor to start a political career, he worked for a law firm called White & Case that actually represented BCCI. So he went from prosecuting the BCCI to working for a law firm which defended the BCCI. This was likely his foot in the door of this underground corporate criminal network. Giuliani would later help to destroy all the crime scene evidence from Ground Zero. Giuliani's sidekick on 9/11 was Police Commissioner Bernard Kerik, who appeared to be coaching some of Rudy's actions that day, keeping him away from the media and even answering questions for him about explosives in the buildings. In fact, Bernard Kerik gave us the first official government pronouncement that no explosives were involved in the destruction of the World Trade Center buildings. Kerik's department was also the same one that found that pristine, completely undamaged hijacker's passport, which survived a plane impact, and Fireball, which destroyed 2 titanium black boxes and 3 towers. Yeah, Kerik would later receive a nomination from President Bush to become Director of Homeland Security, which he declined for personal and political reasons, and instead took a job training the Iraqi police force in Iraq alongside L. Paul Bremer. Both men are credited for turning Iraq into the unwinnable quagmire it is today. In February of 2010, Carrick was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison for conspiracy and fraud charges, unrelated to the crimes of 9/11, unfortunately, but it still goes to show you what kind of person he is. Definitely the kind of person you'd want inside the New York City police force during a staged event like 9/11. And lastly, we have the Pentagon. It's certainly peculiar, to say the least, that al-Qaeda terrorists hell-bent on destroying the USA would not crash their plane into the north wing of the Pentagon, where all the most important offices were, like Donald Rumsfeld, John Ashcroft, etc., and that they would instead choose to target the one section of the Pentagon that had most recently been refurbished to withstand missile impacts. It's also interesting to note that the company which completed the $258 million refurbishment to Wedge 1 of the Pentagon was also hired as a contractor to clean up Ground Zero in New York City. Wedge 1 also coincidentally housed the Pentagon's Budget Analyst Office, where DoD staffers were working on the mystery of the $2.3 trillion that was reported missing by Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld in a press conference the day before 9/11. The Pentagon's comptroller in charge of that money at the time was an interesting fellow named Dov Zakheim, a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, the International Institute for Strategic Studies, and a contributor to the neocon think tank Project for the New American Century. Zakheim helped write the PNAC document Rebuilding America's Defenses, in which he is credited for the line which states, "Further, the process of transformation, even if it brings revolutionary change, is likely to be a long one, absent some catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor." Several members of the Bush administration, including President Bush himself, would later refer to 9/11 as a new Pearl Harbor. A respected and established voice in the intelligence community, his views were eagerly accepted. And Dov went from his position at Systems Planning Corporation to become the comptroller of the Pentagon in May of 2001. Perhaps not so coincidentally, it was an SPC subsidiary, Tridata Corporation, that oversaw the investigation after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center in 1993. SPC, according to their official website, specializes in many areas of defense technology production and manufacture, including a system developed by their radar physics group called the Flight Termination System, or FTS. This is a system used to destroy target drones, craft that would be fired on by test aircraft or weaponry, in the event of malfunctions or misses. This highly sophisticated wargame technology allows the control of several drones from a remote location on varying frequencies and has a range of several hundred miles. This technology can be used on many different types of aircraft, including large passenger jets. According to the SPC website, a recent customer at that time was Eglin Air Force Base, located in Florida. Eglin is very near another Air Force base in Florida, MacDill Air Force Base, where Dov Zakheim contracted to send at least 32 Boeing 767 aircraft as part of the Boeing Pentagon tanker lease agreement. As the events of September 11, 2001 occurred, little was mentioned about these strange coincidences and the proximity of Dov Zakheim and his group. Since there was little physical evidence remaining after the events, investigators were only left with photographic and anecdotal evidence. This is a photograph of the Flight Termination System module from their site. Note it has a cylindrical shape and is consistent with the size and shape of the object observed under the fuselage of Flight 175. The Boeing lease deal involved the replacement of the aging KC-135 tanker fleet with these smaller, more efficient Boeing 767s, which were to be leased by Dov Zakheim's group. The planes were to be refitted with refueling equipment, including lines and nozzle assemblies. In this enlargement of Flight 175, we can clearly see a cylindrical object under the fuselage and a structure that appears to be attached to the right underside of the rear fuselage section. When seen in comparison, it is obvious that the plane approaching the Trade Center has both these structures, the FTS module, and the mid-air refueling equipment, as configured on the modified Boeing 767 tankers. Of particular interest is the long tube-like anomalous structure under the rear fuselage area of 175. This structure runs along the right rear bottom of the plane. The equipment attached to the underside of the plane which hit the World Trade Center is identical in every single way to the Boeing 767s issued by Dov Zakheim.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Bring it back.
The video you're watching now came from Loose Change First Edition.
Did you catch that?
It appears to show the FTS pod self-destructing just before impact.
Also, notice that the flash is reflected in the fuselage of the plane. The flash is also present in footage taken by Evan Fairbanks, Jennifer Spell, and CNN. Al-Qaeda certainly couldn't have added this equipment at Logan International Airport. And even if they did, the flight crew would have noticed it. So where did this plane come from?
Another interesting piece of 9/11 evidence is the last 12 seconds of UA-175. Since every amateur videographer in New York City had their cameras pointed up at the burning Tower 1, the second plane strike was filmed from nearly every conceivable angle. Expert analysis of this plane leads to some startling revelations. First, there is the expertly controlled flight characteristics of this plane. During its last 12 seconds of flight, UA-175 made a single corrective maneuver so perfectly timed and executed that it's unlikely it was piloted by human hands.
One of the things that jumped out at me when I looked at the footage of the video of Flight 175 as it went into the World Trade Center is it appeared to me that there was something on the under fuselage of that aircraft that did not belong there, at least not with a commercial airliner. Now, I'll tell you where I have seen attachments that look like that on military aircraft. So the question you have to answer now is, was that the commercial airliner that hit the World Trade Center, or possibly was it an aircraft that looked very similar but was a military type airplane?
All the recorded sources, all the different photographic evidence that was produced by CNN and ABC, they all show this pod. It's there. You can see it with your own eyes. And in my professional opinion, that there was a pod attached to the bottom of that aircraft, and therefore it was not United Airlines Flight 175.
If you take a careful look at the flight paths of American Airlines 11 and UA-175, the two flights that took off from Boston's Logan Airport and crashed into the Twin Towers, you'll find a major clue. Not only did both these planes cross paths directly over Stewart Air Force Base, but they did so at the exact same time. Another odd synchronicity is Flight 93, which had been sitting on the tarmac delayed at the airport for nearly 40 minutes with no explanation. Originally scheduled to take off at 8:01 a.m., it was delayed until the moment that Flight AA-11 crashed into the North Tower at 8:43 a.m. Another interesting piece of evidence that ties Stewart Air Force Base to the center of this 9/11 conspiracy is the white mystery plane spotted over Washington and the Pentagon. Through careful investigation, we've been able to map out the flight paths of these two ominous aircraft, which have been identified as E-4Bs, a type of aircraft that the military uses as mobile command posts. What concerns me is that both of these aircraft took off from and landed at Stewart Air Force Base. Another interesting coincidence I found was that Flight 93 turned around directly over Hopkins Airport, and Flight 77 turned around directly over Tri-State Airport. Webster Tarpley has done some of the most thorough research into the wargame exercises that were taking place on the day of 9/11. But this white mystery plane, the Doomsday plane, what was it doing over the Pentagon and the White House on 9/11? Who was flying in that plane? What were they doing? Being the comptroller for the Pentagon and the chief financial officer, you have to kind of wonder what Dov Zakheim was doing on 9/11. And what his connections were to the $2.3 trillion that were missing from the Pentagon the day before 9/11.
If anything, the individuals and organizations outlined in this video are at least as suspicious as the 19 hijackers themselves.
They have nothing on us. Why don't you? Book 'em, Dano.